As introduced, I'm Sanmitra Bhattacharya. I'm a second year PhD student from the University of Iowa, and today I'm going to present our talk on the use of MeSH terms for full-text document summarization. And this work has been done with my colleague, Vietha Thuk, who recently graduated from Iowa and is now working at Yahoo Research, and under the guidance of our advisor, Professor Padmini Srinivasan, who is also here today in the audience. In this work, primarily we are trying to develop some algorithmic techniques to get a summary from the full-text document, which takes the advantage of both the good things of the full-text and the MEDLINE abstracts. And finally, we are going to use the summary in other biomedical text mining applications. In this research, we focus more on developing the algorithmic techniques than the application of the summaries in the later applications. The motivation comes primarily from the current trends of the biomedical text mining research and the kinds of data that are generally used by the biomedical text mining researchers. This data comes primarily in two forms. One is the MEDLINE Records, and the other is the full-text documents. And a lot of us here know that these two kinds of records are very different from each other. To point out a few of these differences, for example, the MEDLINE records are all freely available. There are currently over 18 million MEDLINE records. They have a fixed structure in terms of title, abstract, and some associated metadata. And they have been historically used much more extensively in the biomedical text mining research. On the other hand, full-text documents, they have much limited availability. Mostly due to licensing issues, and also they have varying structural characteristics, and it's often difficult to distinguish in a full-text document between the core and the peripheral information, and so it often turns out to be a very challenging task when it comes to information retrieval or information extraction. The other motivations are that currently there has been increasing use of full-text documents. This is mainly because of the more and more availability of full-text because of PubMed Central, which houses over like 2 million MEDLINE 2 million full-text documents, and the Open Access Initiative, which encourages more and more documents to be publicly available. And this trend has also been seen in the recent research initiatives such as the Trek genomics tracks of 2006 and 2007, and several of the recent biocreative tracks. And the benefits of using full-text are several, mainly that full-text covers much more information compared to a MEDLINE abstract, and also most of the practical or industrial applications, those are based on the full-text documents. However, the challenges of using full-text are that they are much more expensive to process, and they have higher rate of false positive due to the noise and the embellishments that are present in the full-text documents. So the solution that we propose is to find an intermediate representation between an abstract and a full text, such that we can find out only the core portions of these full text documents. And as a lot of us here know that there are several existing applications like PubMed for searching MEDLINE, GeneDocs, which is our in-house gene information retrieval system, and several other systems are built on top of the MEDLINE abstracts. But not only are there fewer systems built for the full-text articles, but also the performance of these systems don't translate so well when it comes to the full-text articles. So we propose an intermediate representation that is a summary of a given number of sentences, and we can select the number of sentences depending on the application for which you're using. And we can select a 5-sentence summary, a 10-sentence summary, or an n-sentence summary. Just to see how we can select the sentences, for example, let's take a full-text document like this. Obviously, the title portrays very important information about this article, and so does several other sentences from the body of the article. And we can select these sentences, and this can represent the core or the most vital information that we need to get from this full-text document. Here's a basic flowchart of how the process is going to work. So first we take a full-text article. We remove the abstract from the article. I'll explain why we do that later on. Then we split this article into sentences using a sentence splitting program. We index the sentences using the smart information retrieval system. Then we run two kinds of retrieval experiments. One is the MeSH term-based retrieval and the MeSH profile-based retrieval on this index of sentences, and finally after that we get a ranked list of sentences from which we can select a given number of sentences as a summary. The reason for removing abstract is twofold. Not only that we can later use these abstracts for evaluation purposes, but also we can later add these abstracts to the summary so as to reinforce the information content of a summary. So as I said, the two most important parts of this flowchart are the MESH term-based retrieval and the MESH profile-based retrieval, and I'll first talk about the MESH term-based retrieval. Before I go into the details of the MESH term-based retrieval, it's important to highlight a few things about the MESH terms. So MESH terms are medical subject headings which come from a controlled vocabulary. They have been assigned to the biomedical documents by trained annotators at the National Library of Medicine, and generally they provide a high-level abstraction of an article. The MESH terms can have two parts. One is called the descriptor and the other part is called the qualifier. In this example, for example, neoplasms is the descriptor of the MESH term and blood is a qualifier. And also MESH terms can be of two types. For example, the major and non-major MESH terms, and major MESH terms are generally identified with an asterisk on top of them, as in this example, neoplasm is a major MESH term. So the process of getting the summary, as I have already shown in the flowchart, so we follow those steps of getting sentences from the full text document, indexing those sentences, and then treating each sentence as individual records and running a retrieval experiment on them. And in this case, for the MESH term-based retrieval, we use the MESH terms that are used to index the document as a query on that index of sentences. For example, and also it's important to mention that in our research we have used only the descriptors of the major MESH terms for doing this retrieval, and an example will be neoplasms, mutation, etc. On an index of sentences of a full text document. And from that we get a top ranked 10 sentences where we can select the value of n depending on the application for which it's meant to use. The second part that's important in this flowchart is the MESH profile-based retrieval, and in this case, it's important to note that MESH terms comes from a controlled vocabulary, and it might be often the case that the actual MESH terms might not be present in the exact form within the body of the document. So we devised a way to find some additional free text terms for a particular MESH term that can be built on top of a MESH term. And the way we build these profiles is that we take around 2,500 documents indexed with a particular MESH term. We create a term vector for each of these records, and then we create a ranked list of free text terms that will adequately represent this particular MESH term. In this example, for the MESH terms neoplasm, we find other free text terms from the MEDLINE records which are associated with this MESH term, for example, cancer, tumor, carcinoma, and so on. And we can select a given number of these free text terms to represent the MESH term neoplasm. And the number of terms that we choose to represent a particular MESH term can be a definite number, for example, 5, 10, 15, or 20. However, we have seen that 5 and 10 tend to work out the best on a small development set. Also, the number of terms can be of variable length, which we call the variable length profiles. And the way to build these profiles is that we find two sets of MEDLINE documents, a positive set and a negative set, in which case a positive set of documents will be indexed by a particular MESH term, and a negative set is not indexed by that MESH term, but it contains the MESH term within itself. And then we test the ability of this profile of varying lengths to separate the positive and the negative set. And ideally, if we choose a good cutoff for the variable length profile, the positive documents should be ranked higher than the negative documents. It was interesting to note that almost 19% of the MESH terms did not need to be expanded with any additional free text term, while around 17% of them need to be expanded with as many as 20 terms. And similar to the MESH term-based retrieval, here again we repeat the exact same steps, but instead of using the MESH terms as a query, here we use the MESH free text profiles as a query. And again, here we get a ranked list of sentences from which, depending on the application, we can select the number of sentences we want in our summaries. to compare the performance of a system, we used a state-of-the-art document summarization system, which is called MED. And for MED, we use from MED we get a MED true summary with the default settings of MED, and the other is the random summary, which we also get using the MED system. And for evaluation, we compare our summaries and all the baseline methods to the abstracts. And here we use the rogue metric, which is a widely used metric for document summarization and has been used a lot in previous research. And for rogue, we use 3 different kinds of measures. Rogue 1, which measures the overlap of unigrams of the summary and the abstracts. Rogue 2, which measures overlap of bigrams, and rogue SU4, which measures the overlap of skip bigrams. And finally, we test how our summaries perform compared to the baselines according to the rogue scores, and we see that in every case with the rogue matrices, we have seen that the MESH term-based summaries, they outperform the other baseline summaries, and this the differences in numbers have been found to be statistically significant. We also compare our MESH profile-based summaries with the MESH term-based summaries, and for the MESH profile-based summaries, we have 3 different kinds of summaries. Where we get summary using 5 terms in the MESH profiles, 10 terms, and variable length of terms. And here again we see that the figures that we see for the MESH profile variable length summaries, those are statistically significant compared to the differences with the MESH term-based summaries. Other than these automated evaluations, we did a small-scale human evaluation where we asked 3 assessors to rate the sentences of the summary and the baselines on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 denotes the highest score. And then we calculate the accuracy of a summary as the sum of the score of the individual sentences of the summary divided by the maximum possible score a summary can get, which is 5 times the length of summary. And with the human evaluations, we see that the accuracy of the abstracts is the best. However, it is closely followed by the accuracy of the MESH profile-based summaries. And it's important to note here that the MESH profile-based summaries, that score outperforms and is much closer to the score of the abstract compared to the other baseline summaries. And so now, since we have already discussed about the algorithmic techniques of how we can get this in-sentence summary, now it's important to see like how the summary will behave in case of an application, and in this case we choose a retrieval application. And the way it is designed is that we took 100 documents from the Trek 2006 genomics track, and for this set of documents we have 26 queries to run on this set, and we run 5 different variations of this set of 100 documents. And first of all, we run the experiments on a set of abstracts from this 100 documents, then the set of full text documents, then 2 kinds of summaries which come from the MESH profiles, and a hybrid summary, which is a conjugation of the summary of the 10-sentence long MESH profile summary and the abstract. And for the retrieval experiment, we use the document level mean average precision score, which is used by Trek for evaluating our summaries and the other systems. And here we see that the full text outperforms all the other systems. However, it is important to note that the hybrid summary, which contains just 10 sentences from our system summaries and the abstract, it is that score is very close to the score of the full text. And it's interesting to note that that score is much better to the individual systems and even the abstract. So though the scale of experiment is very small, but we hope that once we do much more rigorous experiments, this hybrid summary or even the profile summaries will be able to outperform the summary of the full text documents, of the performance of the full text documents. Finally, we did 2 kinds of error analysis. I'll just briefly go over this. One is the errors of omission, where we find words and concepts that are present in the abstract and absent in summaries. And I'll just point out a couple of them. For example, the acronyms and synonyms. if an acronym or synonym is present in an abstract and not in the body of that article, the evaluation metric will miss that. And also the missed major mesh term, which happened only in the case of the baseline summaries, because the baselines don't take advantage of the mesh terms like we do. We also calculated the errors of commission, that is words and concepts which are present in the summary but absent in abstract. And just one point here is interesting to note, that in general the summaries from the baseline systems and even our system summaries were not as concise as the abstract. And generally for the baseline system summary, the number of words was around 15% more than the mesh profile based summaries. Finally, I'd like to point out a couple of limitations and advantages of our system. First of all, one limitation is that our system depends heavily on the accuracy of the mesh term assignment, but by the annotators at the NLM. So you can see that if that assignment is wrong, then the system can act in a different way. And also it's not applicable in case of unindexed articles or some articles which have been recently added to the MEDLINE and have not yet been assigned the mesh terms by the annotators. However, the advantage is that we can create summaries for virtually any full text document that is indexed by MEDLINE, and we can create pseudo abstracts for articles which does not have an abstract by themselves. For example, some comments or editorial letters and so on. And in future directions, I'd like to point out three of them which we think are important directions to pursue. One is that we'd like to build mesh profiles using other techniques such as taking vocabulary source, for example the UMLS, and also would like to test our summaries in case of some specific domains, for example gene summaries, which have been studied before. And another important aspect is to look at the novelty detection and aspect level diversity, as was explored in TREC 2006 and 2007. Finally, I'd like to thank the assessors for human evaluations, our text mining and retrieval group, and reviewers for helpful sessions, and the funding agencies. Thank you.